I am Brad Keelor. He is John Huntoon. Coming up next on Director's Cut, you're going to get some trash talk about East Coast beaches.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week, I sit down with a different GI member who has stories to tell. Some of them are personal, some are professional, but all of them are fun. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, take your phone, take your computer. If you have a VR device, I guess you could use that and put it right on your face. Head over after you watch this today to geoinstitute.org, and there you will find out a great many things about our group, such as we are a technical society, such as we have about 12,000 members, such as we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers.
Yes.
I can't even get my employer's name right. The last thing that's important here, if you like what you see today, and I think you will, you should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. With all of that very dense information out of the way, we bring in our guest for the week, coming to us from Georgia. It is John Huntoon, the president of BioBilt Infrastructure Systems. And we're going to hear a little bit about that later on, maybe including in this first question. We ask 10 questions every week. 2 of them are the same that we ask everybody. We start with one of those. John, describe your job in 45 seconds.
Sure, Brad. Thanks for having me on Director's Cut. It's great to be here. If I was to describe my job in 45 seconds, right now I'm developing a startup company. We design, manufacture, and market something called a root-inspired ground anchor. It's a bio-inspired modification to a conventional ground anchor or tieback. We're doing basically everything. So manufacturing, we have software, developing those customer relationships, and doing all the marketing. I'm the president. When you own your own company, you get to be president of it. And that's what I'm doing right now.
When you, as people do, encounter individuals out in the world who don't know anything about engineering, and you have to explain what you're doing, what do you say?
This happens quite a lot, actually. My wife's in like the medical field, right? So when we meet up with her friends or her family, they're talking about medical stuff. I have no idea what they're talking about. But then they ask me what I do, and usually I go with some version of, I'm a civil engineer. Pretty much everyone knows what that is. You ask a follow-up question. Well, I'm a geotechnical engineer. Well, I do retaining walls. Well, you kind of dip the toe in, see how interested people are. The short answer is I don't describe specifically what I do to the layperson. It's a very niche part of a niche field that I'm involved in.
But I do think when people find out, like once you start getting into those details, it goes one of 2 ways generally, right? The person says, "Oh, you're a lot smarter than me," and the conversation kind of ends there. Or they just dive into it. I mean, you have to have had that experience where somebody just goes nuts asking you questions about it, right?
A few times. I would say whenever that's happened, it's always come from the biology side. And that's, so like folks that are, like I think I talked to someone who was a plant biologist one time. And that's, if we talk about the bio-inspired, I'm much more on the inspired side. I'm a little bit less on the bio side. So when folks start asking me about the plant biology, specifically why root systems are structured in all sorts of various ways, those are my weaker topic areas. I'm much more on applying those principles to the engineering world.
Oh, so that's good, though.
It does happen.
So we'll talk a little bit more about your company and what you've got going on now, and Bioinspired Geotechnics too. We have to get to some of the fun questions here on Director's Cut. And the one that we teased at the top, we're going to get to right away. You spent most of your life on the West Coast, and now you find yourself on the eastern side of this country. Better beaches, East or West Coast?
All right. So first of all, there's a reason West Coast rhymes with best coast. Okay. It's the best coast. The beaches in particular, right? Going to the beach on the West Coast, at least where I'm from, Northern California and up the coast. I spent time in Oregon, Washington. That means something totally different than if you go to like Florida and you say you're going to the beach, or you go along the eastern seaboard and you say you're going to the beach. It means something totally different. On the West Coast, it's somewhere between a nature hike and going swimming. It's somewhere between those two things, right? So you can entertain yourself all day at a West Coast beach. There's going to be wildlife. There's going to be big waves crashing into the shore. There's going to be rocks. You can go up high. You can get the great views. The sun sets directly into the water on the West Coast, which doesn't happen on the eastern seaboard. And then I came, when I first came back to the East, it was really confusing to me because people drive their trucks and their Jeeps and everything right out onto the beach. Really odd. I saw it like all on the Gulf Coast, up the East Coast, and it's odd until you realize that on the East Coast beaches, there's just not that much to do, right? So you got to bring the TV, you got to bring the beer cooler. Without the suds and the TV, the football game, you're going to be bored after like an hour and a half. But West Coast beaches, for my money, hands down, the superior beach game out there. My favorite parts of the East Coast, like Maine, rocky, not really that many beaches. Yeah. And then what we were talking about before the show, like the low country area, Georgia, South Carolina, where it's kind of like marshlands anyway. So for me, West Coast beaches all day. It's refreshing. It's cool. You don't want to go, you go on the beach in Panama City, Florida. Boy, it's hot. You get hotter just sitting in there. So West Coast beaches all day long.
So if you had to give everybody one beach recommendation on the left coast of America, what would it be other than the big guys? I mean, so you give everybody a little insight. Where should they be going when they're?
Wow. You really can't go wrong if I give the answer that way. A beach that I think is really interesting is there's a beach at the, obviously on the coast of Humboldt National Forest in California. Illustrate what I'm talking about, right? You've got massive redwood forests right on the beach. You've got they have wild elk herds out there.
Wow.
So you're sitting on the beach. You brought a book or you brought your picnic or whatever. There's some elk walking behind you. The waves are crashing out there. You've got big rock headlands off in the distance. So I'd recommend, Humboldt National Forest, that kind of Northern California, Oregon area is beautiful. You can't go wrong. You'll be entertained all day. The water's not that cold. Get in there.
I think people are going to be sold on that. That is an excellent choice. Our third question is always the research or practice question. You're kind of in an interesting spot here where you finished up your degree in the spring and now you've started up your own company. So I thought for this one, actually, we talked about it before. Talk a little bit about your transition from academia to industry. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but right now, what has this been like to make this move?
Sure. So the past, I would say like 8 months or so, that entire time has been my transition between academia and industry. Before, I guess that's kind of the start of the year, before 2024, I was fully embracing academia, right? We're just doing academic research, applying for grants, doing laboratory studies. And then at the start of this year, we really needed to take our research out to the field, right? Kind of go in a different direction, get out of the laboratory and do things at the full scale. that's really when I started making that transition between academia and industry. A lot of the considerations are kind of different, right? You're dealing with different, I'll say, standards for what constitutes useful and reliable research. And so over the past 8 months, I've gone from not really understanding the manufacturing processes that well, not really understanding how you could actually do full-scale research, to now, within the next month or two here, we're going to be manufacturing the anchors that we'll be using in full-scale research, right? And so that's been a process, absolutely, over that time period. I developed my dissertation during that time, defended my dissertation about a month ago. So through that entire time, it's just been me slowly transitioning between academia and industry, and the industry position where I am now. It's been a slow process, but it happens.
We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the interview, but that is a really good start here. We even have a specific bio-inspired question. So for everybody who's waiting for that one, we will get to it. Have to have a couple of other fun ones first here. And I don't know where this one came from, but we make you think back on Director's Cut. And so this is a nostalgia question. What pet did you dream about having as a kid?
So I was a kid I grew up in, it's called Alameda, California. My wife always laughs when we go back there because the properties are like little postage stamps compared to what you see in Georgia. So we had a very small house, which for our town was big, but in reality, it's very small. So my parents gave me the excuse that we couldn't get a dog. I really wanted a dog. I really wanted a beagle. I don't know why. Something about the beagle, the coloration, the spots, just really seemed like that's what I wanted. But we ended up getting a cat. Loved the cat. Now I've got a dog. We have a big Labrador. He's like 100 pounds, so not really a beagle size, but beagle.
And it is some adjustment, right? Because the big dog, little dog. As a kid, we had a Labrador Retriever. She was about 90 pounds, and that's a sizable dog. My parents now, the last couple of dogs they've had have been beagles, and it is a really different experience. They're not going to bowl you over. They're always hunting for stuff. The Labradors, is yours kind of big and goofy? Like smart,
yeah, he's
but
big
goofy?
And goofy?
Yeah.
Big and goofy.
And that's what you want.
Doesn't mean any harm by anything. He's just big and goofy. Sometimes you catch him.
Big enough to terrify people.
Oh, yeah. People are terrified. They see him on the street. He starts jumping up and down, and they think, oh, gosh, this bear is going to run me over. But he's not. He's just having fun.
So before the interview, I always do all this homework. I spend as much time looking things up on the web as I can, and I try to dig up nuggets from people's past. And I found information on you on the Oregon State 3D Printing Club, and as we talked before the interview, you weren't part of that for very long.
No.
So it's hilarious that they have you memorialized up on that website. But you do a lot of 3D printing. I have a college freshman, so I've done a lot of college visits over the last couple of years. Every single one, they show you the 3D printers. I think that's just a thing. Like colleges are like, parents will be impressed by our 3D printing capabilities. Tell everybody about what 3D printing you've been doing and why is it useful?
Sure. So the only 3D printing that I've done personally is fused layer deposition modeling, right? So this is you're building something up from a base plate by depositing layers and layers of plastic. There's other ways to 3D print things, different materials, but that's the one I've been involved in. The first time I was exposed to that was, I guess it was 2014 or 2015 at Oregon State University. We had a 3D printing club. Apparently I made an enormous impact, even though I was only part of it for a few months. But back then, you got to kind of think back. This was before drones were really popular. Certainly mass market drones were not really available. They were expensive. difficult to get your hands on. And the 3D printing club at the time was working on, can we 3D print these quadcopter drones? Can we make them more economical? Can we improve the designs, make them stronger so we can get more power onto the drones and everything like that? And sure enough, 5 years later, these companies come out and they're 3D printing drones. They're doing things with injection molding, which is even less expensive, but you have to prototype in 3D printing. And if I think back about it, because you've prompted me to do so, I didn't even remember that I was part of this club. But if I think back about it, the 3D printing club really was at the cutting edge of the manufacturing processes and the types of products that are going to come out later. We have, at Georgia Tech, we've had the capability to do what we call rapid prototyping. And I think that's what a lot of industry kind of uses 3D printing for at the moment. It allows you to create a version of the object or the design that you want to study without going through the processes of creating like big molds or devoting an enormous amount of production space to manufacturing something. And that's the really big advantage. So I can give you an example from my own business. There's a way to, so back up. The product that we manufacture is made out of cast iron, right? There are actually ways to 3D print metal, but there's a different way to 3D print sand. Sand is used as the molding medium for these metal cast products, right? So basically it works by, you make an impression of the object that you want to create, you fill that impression with a molten metal, it solidifies, and then there's your product. They actually have 3D printing sand molds. So you can take sand, like what we would call, it's, what is it? Probably, it's probably on the edge of sand and clay or sand and silts for us. But they combine that with binders, deposit it in individual layers across the printing bed, and you can create a cavity this way that you can then fill with metal. So that method of 3D printing has made producing these individual prototypes so much less expensive than it would be if you had to create the entire casting pattern. You had to devote an entire production line to developing this one prototype. You can get the cost down so much more using 3D printing. It's really excellent for that purpose. So
sold, I think.
Yeah.
This is
and I would say, because you kind of framed the question to me before as how would you sell it to someone interested in getting involved? It's a gateway to manufacturing and cutting edge newer technologies, right? So imagine you get into 3D printing and then you discover that they have sand 3D printing, and you discover that they have, there's a method to basically sinter metal together. So they'll take tiny particles of metal and press them together to create things that way. That the additive manufacturing is really interesting. So it's a gateway drug, if you will, to that kind of manufacturing. It's great to get involved.
So the other question we ask everybody else when they come on the show, I feel like it's my duty to ask this. How did you first get involved in ASCE and GI?
Yeah, so my first involvement with ASCE would have been through the Student Steel Bridge competition back in, I think it was 2016 that I was most involved. The Oregon State Beavers took third place in the Pacific Northwest Regional Conference. I think it was third place. And then we went on to the national conference at, it was at BYU University that year. We had, unfortunately, some embarrassing design issues, which may or may not have resulted in catastrophic failure. But it was a great experience. You get to, you get exposed to kind of the design environment, and the way they set up the prompt is excellent because you're forced to deal with constraints, right? So there's a constraint for the space that you can work within, the size of the individual pieces, how heavy they are, all those things. And it really forces you to think like an engineer. So that was a great first kind of exposure to ASCE. And then exposure to the Geo-Institute, I think I really got first through the Geo Society at Georgia Tech. At Georgia Tech, we kind of operate one of these Geo-Institute student chapters, and that's, it's a great program. It's been going for like 30 years, entirely student run. We do a lot of fun activities. And I think the first time I was actually involved in GI was like the student council, Geo-Institute Student Council. But yeah, I hadn't been involved in GI before that, but I'm glad I'm here now, right? So.
And I think the pitch here is that student membership is absolutely free. It is $0 and that gets you an ASCE membership, and you can choose an institute. And of course, we hope that you choose GI. We have 40 student chapters in GI across the United States. So not just Georgia Tech. There are 39 other fine establishments that have established their own we call them grad student organizations as well. And we would love to have you viewers as members of those. Now, I had to ask a baseball question in here because, again, I do my digging, and I found out that you played baseball for a large part of your life. I feel like more than most of the other sports, it's a little more analytical. You've got time to think while you're out there because there's a lot of time to think. So, John, what similarities, now that you're doing engineering as your life's work, what similarities do you see between engineering and baseball?
So I thought of kind of two ways that I feel like the two things are similar. The first one was kind of what you talked about before, is like data and probability play a big role in both things, right? Like a couple years ago, for people who don't know, baseball has kind of been played the same way for 100, 150 years. There's really no change with the way players were lined up or how people thought about producing offense, like scoring points. But then they started coming out with advanced analytics and ball tracking, and they can track the players' movements and things like that. And there was a period of time where the availability of this information almost broke the game of baseball. Suddenly you had so much information, the defenses could be so much better than they previously were, that it almost destroyed baseball. They had to pass rules to say that you couldn't do those things anymore, because it was just distorting the game so much. The same kind of data, the value of data is definitely present in engineering as well. Like, especially geotechnical engineering, right? The difference between having high quality, very particular testing at the exact location that you're interested in, and having just an old geologic map to go off of is enormous. Like that can completely change the scope of your entire project. Like one of the things we work on with BioBilt is we have a Monte Carlo simulation. So it's taking the probability of a certain soil parameter based on the available in situ testing. The higher quality in situ testing you have, the more data points you have, you reduce the uncertainty. Right? So that's the situation of baseball in 2015, 2016. We're reducing the uncertainty of where a certain player, where David Ortiz is going to hit that ball. Now we can play great defense. Before we didn't have that information, we weren't able to play great defense. The other thing I would say is engineering project delivery reminds me a lot of the way a baseball team needs to work. So, there's a lot of team sports where having one great player is really significant. Like it makes your team so much better. Like think about having peak LeBron James on your basketball team, right? Sometimes LeBron James can just take over the game. Doesn't matter who else is out there. Soccer, like sometimes Messi's just going to take over the game. Like he can just do it. With baseball, because all the players come up to bat more or less the same number of times, having one great player, it doesn't benefit you that much, right? This is why, sorry for any Angels fans watching, but like Angels fans have had some of the best players in the history of the game for decades now, but they only have one, right? They only get to bat 4 or 5 times a game. You have 8 other positions in the lineup. For engineering, it's the same way, right? We have a project delivery pipeline. It's going to have structural engineers, geotechnical engineers, contractors, owners. if one of those people is great, that's good. But if one of those parties doesn't provide the right information, they don't understand the situation, it's going to throw your whole project delivery off, right? So every member of the team kind of needs to be at the same level for that project to go well to that level. I think it's really similar to how baseball works.
I like that a lot, and I do. The Angels will always have 2002, and
that's fair.
That's about it. But ironically, if you look back at that team, not to go down this rabbit hole here, that was probably one of the most balanced teams they've ever had. And I think that just goes back to the point you just made, how important it is to have that balance. There was no Mike Trout on that team who was, people were making special rules for or getting out of the way for. Everybody, it was David Eckstein time. So, I like that a lot. I'm going to use that a lot. So we have 3 questions left, and 2 of them are pretty much related to your new venture here, what you got going on. The first one is very direct. I mean, I think it's jarring to a lot of people to establish a startup, right? There are some big changes that you have to make, not just professionally, but also in your life. John, what's been the most difficult aspect for you of starting a business?
I would say the most difficult aspect, which is also the thing that I like most about it, and the thing I find is most rewarding, is all the learning, right? If you go to school, like I was trained as a civil engineer and now a geotechnical engineer. Theoretically, you're learning a lot of what you need to know, or at least a significant portion of what you need to know before you actually go into your job. Like you might then have to learn contracts or project delivery, but you should know all of the technical stuff, or at least most of the technical stuff beforehand. Starting my own business has made me realize how little I know about all these other disciplines, like the legal discipline, patents, all the manufacturing techniques, those kind of things, right? And you have to get up to speed in all of those different disciplines, sometimes even just to have a conversation with people. Like, for example, the metal casting industry. When I first started talking to manufacturers that do this metal casting, I didn't even have the terminology. Like we couldn't even have a meaningful discussion because I understood so little about it. The other thing I've had a chance to do is look at like the patent process, right? So the intellectual property that BioBilt owns has gone through this process all the way back from when it was at Georgia Tech, and now it's owned by BioBilt. BioBilt has a license to it, I should say. The things that I know now about the patent process would probably make me approach that very differently if I could just jump back in time 3 years, right? You learn so much. I had no idea how little I knew about the patenting process. There's examples like that all over the place. We talked before the interview about like different business structures. What's an LLC? Why do I want it? What's a C Corp? Why do I not want that? Like what makes the most sense for your business and your funding needs, and your different founders and things like that. You have to learn all of that from scratch, basically. And I love doing it. Full disclosure, I love BioBilt, but we'll get to it in a moment. I want to do this again. I want to learn more about different industries and do more startups. Right? It's addicting. You like it. It's fun to learn. It's fun to learn about new things. But that is also the most challenging part at the same time.
So I think one of the big, I guess it's a knock on engineers in general, is they can be kind of risk averse, right? And the startup community is by definition not risk averse at all. In some cases, you're actually expected to fail a couple times before you have a success so that people take you more seriously. How have you dealt with that? Either the risk tolerance or any aspects of this looking forward. I guess we'll talk about that in a minute, but specifically the risk issue is what I'm wondering about.
Sure. I think there's 2 aspects to the risk issue that we could talk about. Number one is just the technical risk of trying something new, right? That I think is it's a little bit easier to overcome, right? You can manage the risk. You can try it out in a test project. It's easy to overcome. The other risk, which is kind of the personal or the financial, reputational, career-related risks, those are a little more difficult to wrestle with, right? It is a financial risk. I'm doing this full time right now. I'm not working on the side for a different engineering firm. I'm not driving for Uber, right? This is my full-time job, and it needs to succeed. Otherwise, I'm not making any income, right? That's just a personal value judgment, right? I've looked at the situation, decided that, hey, I think this technology has merit. I think the business has merit. I want to pursue it. I want to take that risk and take that chance to get something that I view as better out of the situation. And so that's just a personal value judgment that I'm fortunate enough to have the ability to take, right? A lot of people don't even have the ability to do that. Like, I'm blessed. I have the ability to not worry about my current income. Like today, I get to worry about it in a year, but I don't have to worry about it today. So it allows me to take that risk.
That's perfect. And we will get to one more question in just a minute. It's about bioinspired geotech, but it's still related to what you're doing. First, though, as we move into fall, or what passes for fall, where many of you live, it's currently about 85 degrees here in Virginia. That's fall here.
Yeah.
We have to breach a topic that comes up a disturbing amount on this show. Nonetheless, I thought it was apt to ask you here, John, pumpkin spice, friend or foe?
Okay, so it was also like 85 degrees here in Georgia yesterday. Hardly autumn, hardly fall. I want to say pumpkin spice, friend, but the friend that you only want to see every once in a while.
Oh, I like that.
So it kind of sets me off when I see particularly like coffee shops advertising pumpkin spice, and I look at my calendar and it's August 15th.
Yeah.
August 15th is not pumpkin spice season, people. September 15th is barely pumpkin spice season in Georgia. How can I be expected to wear my fluffy sweater and my, pumpkin t-shirt or whatever and get a pumpkin spice latte when it's 85 degrees outside? Pumpkin spice, delicious. I love a pumpkin pie. I love a pumpkin spice latte. It's got to be the right season. I can only handle so much pumpkin spice.
So as a West Coaster who's a transplant out here, I do have to ask you this follow-up question that's somewhat related. What temperature is your sweater or hoodie threshold? Where will you wear one below? Mine I think is low 70s, probably about 72. I think is where I would be okay in a sweater or a hoodie.
Yeah, I think that changes over the course of the year, doesn't it? 70 in October is way colder than 70 in March or April.
That's a good call.
I spend a lot of time outside in Georgia. I try to get sun and, just go outside. And I'm pretty temperature tolerant in general. So like 90 degrees feels pretty comfortable to me. Doesn't give me any problems. But if you go from 90 degrees down to 70, you're going to be shivering. Like it's like 70 in the mornings here now. And I gotta put the jacket on. So I'm gonna say about 70 degrees is my threshold as well.
I like that.
But if you ask me the same question, in March or April, I'd probably say more like 60.
You gotta bust out the shorts in that situation.
Yeah,
I think.
You get a lot colder.
Our final question today, I like to finish up by looking ahead a lot of the time, and that's what we're going to do here, and we're going to talk about bioinspired geotechnics. What excites you the most about the future of bioinspired geotechnics?
Well, I'm very excited to build some commercialization momentum around this technology space. With BioBilt obviously being kind of the first in this line of technologies, I think BioBilt's success and the industry observation that these bio-inspired technologies can have merit and can change the way that we do things is going to lead to at least several additional companies or technologies entering our industry. So even just things that we have been working on at Georgia Tech include like worm-inspired probes, right? Probes that are able to propel themselves without the aid of some external mechanism or reaction frame. These can allow you to do things like travel along a seam, like a clay seam, without having to align everything perfectly at the ground surface. There's other things like one of our folks is looking at spiderweb inspired geogrids, right? How can we improve the geometry of geogrids to take advantage of kind of the optimized structure of spider webs? And it looks like they're going to have some success with that. Other things like, you brought up earlier, we had some colleagues at UC Davis, they're doing snakeskin inspired soil nails, right? There are applications where I could see that being beneficial. It's really just a matter of manufacturing them, which is not impossible at all.
Right.
So in all of those different spaces, I see the opportunity for successful business, a successful product, successful technology for the industry. It's a matter of getting all of the parties to agree that, yes, there is a future here. There is a technology here that can be beneficial to us, and then getting someone to actually start that business, start that product line, whatever it is. And I'm hopeful that the success of BioBilt will get some momentum going in that direction, which I think it will.
Fantastic. That's a good way to close it out. And of course, if you love Bioinspired Geotechnics, dear viewers, and I'm sure you do, who doesn't, right?
Who doesn't?
You can always get more information. Coming to Geo-Congress is a great way to do it. Geotechnical Frontiers in the spring, we will definitely have a bunch of content related to this topic. We just opened registration. That's going to be in Louisville in March. We hope to see you there. I think that's the great way to close today. So, John, thank you for doing this. You answered all the questions, top notch, A+, I would say, for effort here today. For our viewers, if you liked what you saw, and you probably did because you're here at the end, click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will very lovingly let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. John, thanks again. I hope this was fun.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, I had fun answering those questions. Especially, you got me kind of riled up with the beach thing. This is a topic that's come up before around the coffee table, and I get a little riled up with it. Thanks for having me, everybody. If you're still interested, please check out BioBilt Infrastructure Systems. Check out our website, biobiltis.com, www.biobiltis.com. I'll be happy to put a link or something in the description.
Oh, we'll have one in the show notes. Do not worry about that.
Thank you, Brad.
Appreciate it. Absolutely. For all our viewers, again, you know where to turn every 7 days. We've got one of these Director's Cut episodes, and so we will see you with a brand new episode of Director's Cut next week.